The fight is already over, and the mountain has gone quiet. Snow has darkened under the body, or maybe rainwater is gathering in the stone. One hand lies open in the mud. The blade has fallen out of reach. Nothing in this scene should move again. Then the chest rises. Not like a hero standing up for one more glorious duel. Not like a blessing. Like something in the world has refused to close. Somewhere uphill, a bell sounds through the trees. The body breathes again. For 1 second, the scene should feel impossible. The enemy who walked away is already gone. The crows, the rain, the trees, even the rocks seem to have accepted the verdict. Only the body has not. And that is more frightening than the wound. A wound belongs to battle. Breath after death belongs to something older. That is the fear at the center of this episode. Sekiro, no defeat is bringing From Software's world back to screens, and fans are already waiting for blood, loyalty, Shinobi violence, and the curse of the dragon's heritage. But this is not the biography of a real wolf. It is not a search for a real Ashina. It is not a recap of a game plot. The older question is stranger. Why does Immortality in Sekiro feel less like being saved and more like a body being denied permission to die? To answer that, we have to leave the heroic surface behind. We have to walk into a colder world of mountain ascetics, hidden agents, sacred endurance, Buddhist ideas of attachment, preserved bodies, and stories where survival can become a chain. The real history behind Sekiro is not one man who could resurrect. It is the fear that a body might cross the boundary of death and come back wrong. First, draw the line clearly. Sekiro is fiction. Wolf is fiction. The dragon's heritage is fiction. No document from Sengoku, Japan records a one-armed shinobi resurrecting through sacred blood in a ruined mountain province. That boundary matters because the truth behind a story is not always a hidden person. Sometimes it is a hidden atmosphere. Sekiro works because it gathers several real historical and cultural shadows into one dark shape: civil war, mountain routes, warrior houses, hidden movement, Buddhist imagery, temple spaces, parasitic decay, bloodlines, old bodies, and the fear of corruption that refuses to stay buried. The anime hook makes this moment timely. Sekiro, no defeat is planned as a hand-drawn adaptation of the game, and the story's world is being pushed back into global search again. But the episode has to resist the obvious trap. If we only ask whether ninjas were real, the answer arrives too quickly and the mystery dies. Yes, shinobi existed in pre-modern Japan as spies, scouts, infiltrators, guides, messengers, and specialists in clandestine work. No, they were not usually the black-suited supernatural assassins of later pop culture. And no, that alone does not explain why Sekiro feels so haunted. Spy can make a castle unsafe. A rumor can make a road unsafe. But Sekiro's deepest unease is that even death is unsafe. The deeper force is the way the game binds hidden warfare to a mountain world where death is not clean. In a normal war story, a body falls and the plot moves on. In Sekiro, the fallen body is the plot. It returns. It owes something. It carries blood that is not only blood. That is why the title character can be a shinobi and still not make this a ninja episode. The blade matters, but the wound matters more. The stealth matters, but the return from death matters most. The question is not just who fights in the shadows. The question is, what kind of world makes resurrection look like contamination? Before the body can become strange, the landscape has to become believable. Late medieval Japan was not an empty stage of castles and duels. It was a fractured world of local powers, mountain roads, fortified houses, messengers, scouts, borderlands, and alliances that could turn lethal overnight. The regions most famous for Shinobi memory, Iga and Koka, sit in rough country between larger centers of power. Their later reputation grew from a geography that made hidden movement useful. Japan's National Diet Library describes warring states, ninja taking on diverse missions, undercover operations, nighttime security with bonfires, supply line disruption with roadblocks, infiltration, arson, and even castle seizure in moments of chaos. It also notes that Iga and Koka were famous for self-governing communities that sometimes resisted outside invasion through ambushes, preemptive raids, and night raids. Hills, ravines, villages, shrines, old roads, and local knowledge could matter as much as armor. One man might know which pass flooded after rain. Another might know which road avoided a checkpoint, which family owed whom a favor, or which gate was watched carelessly after midnight. Knowledge like that could change the shape of a conflict without ever appearing as heroism on a battlefield. That is the grounded world behind the Shinobi layer. It is not magic. It is terrain, timing, local networks, fear, and patience. Imagine the sound of straw sandals on wet leaves instead of the clang of a duel. Imagine a message folded inside a sleeve, or a fire seen for only 3 breaths on a ridge. Imagine a servant who remembers which guard drinks too much, or a guide who crosses a valley after dark because his family has crossed it for generations. In later imagination, those skills became almost supernatural. Smoke, fire, climbing, disguise, silent entry, secret houses, hidden tools, and impossible escapes all gathered around the word ninja. But the older usefulness is more human and more tense. A hidden agent is frightening because he turns the landscape itself into a weapon. He makes a wall uncertain. He makes a road uncertain. He makes the person beside the fire uncertain. He also changes the way fear travels. An army announces itself with dust, drums, and banners. A hidden agent may arrive as a rumor before he arrives as a person. By the time anyone knows he was there, the gate is open, the message is gone, or the wrong man has already heard the truth. Sekiro takes that pressure and pushes it into nightmare. Its Shinobi does not simply move through the mountain. He belongs to a world where the mountain has already changed what a human body can mean. The scout's job is to survive unseen. The game's horror asks what happens when survival itself becomes the trap. So this chapter is not here to prove a real wolf. It is here to place him in the kind of terrain that makes a hidden warrior feel plausible. A cold road, a watched gate, a message carried in silence, and a mountain that knows more paths than the ruler does. Now leave the road and climb. The air changes first, and the city falls away behind you. The ground begins to tilt. Cedar trunks cut the light into narrow strips. Somewhere ahead are a shrine rope, a stone step, a cave mouth, a bell, and a waterfall cold enough to stop the breath for a moment. In Japanese religious imagination, mountains were never only scenery. They could be sacred places where gods dwell, where ancestral spirits rest, where danger and purification live beside each other. Japan's national tourism material describes Shugendo as a syncretic mountain religion, combining elements of Shinto and Buddhism with Taoism, older animist beliefs, and shamanistic practices on sacred mountains. Its adherents, known as Shugenja or Yamabushi, are described as embarking on ascetic alpine sojourns, with robes and conch shell calls echoing among forests. That modern travel language is gentle, but the old atmosphere behind it is still powerful. The mountain is not a postcard. It is a testing ground. Its practitioners entered mountains for training, seclusion, fasting, cold water, difficult paths, caves, endurance, and ritual. They crossed valleys, withdrew into deep places, placed the body under strain, and treated the mountain not as a view, but as a teacher. The point here is not to turn a living religious tradition into a horror prop. The point is to understand why a mountain can feel like a threshold. A city tells you the rules. A mountain tests whether those rules still apply. It is easy to see why fantasy and historical memory keep returning to this place. The mountain can hide a spy. It can shelter a hermit. It can hold a shrine. It can produce a holy man, a dangerous rumor, a demon, a ghost, or a warrior who returns from a wound that should have ended him. The same landscape that offers purification can also feel like an entrance to something older and less controlled. It also changes the pace of fear. In a castle, danger may have a name, a crest, a commander. In the mountain, danger is often a sound before it is a face, water under stone, a bell without a visible hand, a branch breaking where nobody should be walking. That is why the mountain in Sekiro matters. It is not just a backdrop for combat. It is the place where the viewer accepts that ordinary categories are weakening. The warrior and the monk begin to occupy the same frame. What is holy can also look rotten, and discipline can stand close to violence. Life and death no longer feel neatly divided. Once the story has carried you up that road, resurrection no longer feels like a random power. It feels like the mountain has broken the hinge between the living and the dead. A body can be disciplined until it becomes a sign. That idea is not unique to Japan, but in the Japanese mountain and Buddhist worlds around this episode, it becomes visually powerful. Think of the ascetic body, thin from fasting, hardened by cold water, marked by walking, sitting, praying, enduring. It is not a body built for comfort. It is a body used as a path. In some extreme traditions, the body after death could become even more charged. Sokushinbutsu, the self-mummified or living Buddhas associated especially with sacred mountains in Yamagata, are a real and rare practice connected with ascetic Buddhism. National Geographic notes that Yamagata's sacred mountains are home to 13 sokushinbutsu, and that devotees understand them as figures in deep meditation between life and death rather than as ordinary mummies. It also stresses that the history is mixed with legend and that the path toward becoming sokushinbutsu involves severe ascetic practice. That careful framing matters. The details are complex, regional, and historically specific, and they should not be flattened into a simple horror image. But for our story, they reveal a crucial tension. A preserved body can be revered. It can be seen as sacrifice, meditation, protection, compassion, or spiritual attainment. To an outsider, the same image can also be deeply unsettling. A human form that death did not erase in the expected way. That double vision is exactly where Sekiro's dread lives. The holy body and the frightening body can occupy the same silhouette. A monk sitting in stillness. A corpse that did not disappear. A warrior who should not stand again. A body that proves discipline, or a body that proves the world is wrong. And the ambiguity is important. The episode must not say that a sacred body is secretly monstrous. That would be cheap and disrespectful. The more interesting point is that human beings can stand before the same body and feel opposite truths. Reverence and fear are not always far apart. What matters for Sekiro is not a direct borrowing claim, but a visual and emotional possibility. The viewer already understands that a body can be more than flesh. It can be oath, punishment, relic, debt, proof, warning, burden. The game does not need to copy any one practice directly for the echo to matter. It draws from a broader visual and religious vocabulary in which bodies, mountains, and death are never simple. Endurance may purify. Endurance may preserve. Endurance may also become terrifying when it no longer looks voluntary, when the person survives because a force larger than the person will not release him. This is why immortality in Sekiro does not feel like a clean blessing. It feels closer to being trapped inside a sacred failure, a body turned into evidence that the boundary has been crossed and not repaired. Most stories tell you to survive. Sekiro asks what survival costs after survival stops being a choice. That is where Buddhist language around attachment becomes useful, as long as we use it carefully. Buddhism contains many traditions and doctrines, and this episode is not reducing them to a slogan. But one broad idea is important for the emotional logic of the story: clinging binds beings to suffering. The refusal to let go can become a chain. In an ordinary heroic story, the warrior returns to life because destiny needs him. In a darker story, the warrior returns because something is still feeding on the world through him. The body comes back, but the world around it worsens. Bloodline becomes burden. Loyalty becomes obligation. Healing begins to look like infection. Victory leaves rot in the water. This is where Sekiro's immortality becomes powerful as horror. The fear is not simply that the hero cannot die. The fear is that nobody can pay the price cleanly. Every resurrection has a shadow. Every refusal of death pushes consequence somewhere else. That structure feels ancient because many cultures understand that bargains with death are rarely free. In the Japanese mountain setting, the bargain gains a sharper edge. The forest already feels alive. Roots grip stone like fingers. Water moves under bridges and through caves. Bells mark time, but not enough to control it. A hidden warrior may be trained to endure hunger, pain, cold, and silence. But endurance is not the same as liberation. A person can be very difficult to kill and still be trapped. A body can keep rising and still be losing something human each time it rises. That is the cruel inversion at the center of the story. What looks like another chance from far away may feel, from inside the body, like being summoned back to a battlefield you already paid for. That is why the best version of this episode should make viewers uneasy before it explains anything. It should let them feel the wrongness of the repeated breath, then show the historical and religious shadows that make the wrongness believable. That is the final turn away from the generic ninja video. The most frightening thing about Sekiro is not stealth. It is not the blade. It is not even death. It is the possibility that survival itself can become a form of decay. Return to the body in the mist. At the beginning, that breath looked like a miracle or a mistake. Now it carries more weight. Behind it is the hidden agent moving through rain and pine. Behind it is the mountain road where ordinary rules thin out. Behind it are ascetics who use the body as a path, sacred places where death and endurance could be imagined differently, preserved bodies that could inspire reverence and unease, and a religious language where clinging can become suffering. None of that makes Sekiro historical in a literal sense. There was no real wolf resurrecting through the dragon's heritage. There was no document proving a real Shina curse. But the fear feels old because the ingredients are old. Mountains that change people, warriors who live in shadows, bodies pushed past comfort, rituals that ask what death means, and stories that know survival can become a chain. That is why immortality in Sekiro feels terrifying. It does not feel like living forever in sunlight. It feels like waking up on cold stone after the world has already decided you should be gone. It feels like owing one more death to a place that will not let the account close. And once you see it that way, the mountain is no longer just scenery. It is the witness. It hears the breath return. It keeps the path open. It refuses to tell you whether the returning body has been blessed, cursed, or merely used. The bell keeps sounding. The forest keeps watching. The mountain does not explain itself. It only lets the body breathe again and leaves us to wonder whether that breath is mercy, punishment, or rot.